afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for what we hope is an interesting conversation around what we're calling preparing for the non-financial aspects of retirement. My name is Ann McCabe. I am the CEO here and a partner at Curo Private Wealth, and I'm joined by my awesome partner, Teresa. Want to say hello?
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Teresa Roberts, COO and partner here with Ann at Curo Private Wealth. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yes, awesome. Before we get into the presentation, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. We will have time at the end for your questions. Our awesome office administrator, Caroline, will be in the chat. So if you have questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. We will have some time at the end to answer those questions. We are also recording this. If you know of someone who would find this information interesting, we will have a recording. So let us know, and we're happy to share it out. Because again, hopefully it will be very good information for people who are preparing for retirement. So today the topic is all around what are the non-financial aspects that we need to be considering when we prepare for retirement. Because as we're going to go through in a couple of moments, there are quite a few challenges that we're seeing folks face going in and actually living in retirement. So we want to really arm you with this information to have you think about some of these non-financial things to consider before you go into retirement. Or if you're already in retirement and you're like, why am I not enjoying this as much as I thought I would? Hopefully we'll give you some good information today to consider. So I don't know if any of you saw the New York Times article that came out the beginning of May. I know at least one of you did because you and I had a conversation during a recent meeting about it. But it was a pretty dire article that interviewed a few different couples who had just recently gone into retirement who were frankly struggling. And this is something that is very common. This is just another challenge that a lot of folks are faced with when they go into retirement. So again, something that we're going to talk about today. The other thing we wanted to share is just some pretty negative statistics around how mortality increases around retirement. So things we want to put in your mind so that you can consider and think about how to maybe do some things differently. So we want you all to live an epic retirement and hopefully not face some of these challenges that we are going to discuss in a moment. So the way we would define an epic retirement is having enough money that allows us to sleep properly at night. So we're not waking up, all stressed out in the middle of the night, but enough purpose to enable us to want to get up in the morning. And we believe that we need a deeper conversation around retirement. So whereas the conversation used to be, do I have enough money? The question now we believe needs to be expanded and broadened. And honestly, I don't think that we as financial advisors have done a great job bringing some of these other things to your attention to prepare for. So that's one of the reasons that Teresa and I felt very strongly to bring this information to you, because we want to do a better job of helping you prepare for the non-financial aspects of retirement. Institutional retirement, as we know it now, is a fairly recent invention. So it's less than 140 years old. And we have to go over to Germany back in 1885, where the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck introduced the idea of a government pension. And essentially what he did is created a government disability insurance program for invalidated government workers that were 70 or older. He also mandated that folks had to leave the workplace at age 70. Now, something that's super interesting is he himself was age 74 when he enacted this law. So we're pretty certain that he grandfathered himself in. But that was the rule that was established back in 1885. You have to go 50 years later, fast forward 50 years, or, jump forward 50 years. During the Great Depression is when FDR created the Social Security Act. It was originally called the Older Workers Pension Act, but people did not want to be an old worker. And so they decided that they would change the name to an easier name to market, which was the Social Security Act. Originally, the age was 65, when you could qualify for benefits. But when they realized that the average American's life expectancy was 63, they decided to lower the age to 62 because they didn't feel like it was fair to have the life expectancy be lower than when, benefits were going to start. But as you can see, the original plan for this government program was meant to be just a bridge of basically 1 year to get you from, when you were going to retire to basically when you were going to pass away. So that was what it was originally designed to be. Something else that's interesting to share is if you go back to 1885, the average age of a German worker back in 1885 was the life expectancy was only age 46. So literally you had a retirement age that was 24 years past the average life expectancy. If you were to fast forward and do that same math for our modern times, that would set a retirement age of 110 years old, which I don't think many of us are going to live that long. So we think that's pretty interesting. So now that we have some good context for the history around retirement, we can go to the next slide where we're gonna kind of take it a little bit negative for a moment. But these are some really serious and challenging things that we see folks face as they go into and through retirement. And these are what we would call the psychological and lifestyle challenges, as opposed to strictly financial challenges that many people think of when you're talking about retirement. The first is a loss of a sense of identity. So many of us have an identity that is closely tied to our work. And I know I am very guilty of this. When someone asks you about yourself, one of the first things we tend to talk about is what we do for a living. So there's a very close tie to who we believe we are from an identity standpoint and what we do for work. When we no longer have that work, we can feel a deep sense of questioning, who am I? I don't even know who I am anymore because so much of my identity was tied up in my work. Next is social and relationship challenges. If you think about how many of our social connections are connected to our work, it's typically a very large number, whether it's our coworkers or our clients that we serve or our teams that we lead. When we leave our workplace, oftentimes those social connections disappear. And we see this especially, no offense to you men out there, but we see this especially with our male clients, because men in general, I think, have a harder time like calling their friends and, creating maybe a lunch to get together. Whereas women are, I think, much more naturally inclined to call and say, hey, let's go grab a glass of wine or a cup of coffee to catch up. Men are not as natural or as comfortable doing that. And so for our male clients who don't have some sort of hobby that keeps them connected to other social relationships, we really do see them struggle with this particular aspect. Next is a change or reduction in mental stimulation. And there are some pretty scary studies out from the Alzheimer's and Dementia Institute that have demonstrated that the progression of those two diseases commences with a loss of mental stimulation. And we're not talking about Sudoku or, puzzles here. We're talking about the positive impact our brain gets when we are working on solving real world puzzles and real world challenges, which we do oftentimes in our work. Next is a financial challenge, and these are psychological issues around not getting a paycheck. So one of the scariest days in our economic life is the last day that we receive a paycheck, direct deposit into our bank account. Even if folks like us have told you the numbers are fine, we've run the math, you are not going to run out of money, please go live your life and enjoy, there is a very deep sense of fear when you know that your paycheck is no longer being direct deposited into your bank account. And second to last, I think there's one more. Second to last challenge is boredom. So this is just finding ways to fill the extra time that we have in the day. So the average retiree in the United States watches 4 hours of TV per day, which I just find incredibly sad. That's compared to 2.5 hours for the overall population, which I also think is a problem, but that's probably a webinar for another day. So, what we really need to do is not just fill our time with mindless activities like watching TV, but really figuring out how are we going to invest the extra time we have in things that bring us meaning. And lastly, one of the challenges that we see is an increase in anxiety and depression, to be expected, right? With some of the challenges that we just talked about. If you are facing some of these real challenges, then it is to be expected that you will potentially experience an increase in anxiety and depression, and just an overall feeling of like, did I really work as hard as I did for as many years as I did to have this be my retirement reality? So these are some real issues that we want to make sure you're aware of. And if you already are in retirement and you find yourself feeling some of these things or having some of these questions, you're not alone. This is very normal. And hopefully, we'll give you some tips today on how to prevent some of these challenges. So, if we go to the next slide, what we want to kind of change the paradigm and the mindset is, instead of dealing with those challenges, let's talk about how do we have an epic retirement. And EPIC is an acronym which stands for E is engage at any age, P is purposeful living, I is integrating vacation and vocation, and then the vitamin C's, which are connectivity, challenge, curiosity, creativity, and charity. So we're going to go through each of these one by one. First being engage at any age. So it used to be that we would retire from significance, and now we want to thrive. We want to have meaningful engagement in our retirement life. So your age only defines you if you allow it. How many of you know an 80-year-old who acts like they are 50? I personally do. My dad is 88 years old and still works pretty much every day of his life. And when I'm working with him, which I do sometimes, I am more exhausted than he is. And he is, like I said, almost 90 years old. And then I bet a lot of us also know someone who is 50 but acts like they're 80, right? So, what we're talking about here is really the distinction between age and old. Age is a chronological factor, so we can trace it back to our date of birth, whereas old is an attitudinal factor. So, we shouldn't allow ourselves to get old until we make the decision that we are going to get old. So, one of the questions I want you all to noodle is, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you are? So think about that over the next couple of days. So next, we're going to go into purposeful living. So one of the most important things when we're going in or preparing for retirement is to make sure that we're living with purpose, to have a meaningful life. This could be one of the most meaningful chapters in our lives, but we have to be very intentional about making sure that we're prepared for it to be meaningful. So we would define work as an engagement that brings others value and brings meaning to you. And there may not be a paycheck involved. There may be a paycheck involved, but not necessarily. So if you find yourself engaged in something that brings others value and brings meaning to yourself, that is what we're going for. And again, it doesn't have to be work for a paycheck. So next, we're going to talk about the balance between vacation and vocation, which is integrating vacation and vocation. So it used to be that we would work really hard for many years and never play, and then we would stop working and all we would do was play. And now we really want to try to find a better balance, because we would call that binge living, right? Doing all work and no play, and then doing no work and all play, we would call binge living, as opposed to a balanced life. So we really want to find that balance between play and work. So there was an interesting study that Rand came out with called the Great Unretirement Trend. And they found that there were 3 reasons that unretirement happens. So people decide to retire and then they decide to unretire and go back to work. The first is that boredom that we talked about, right? People just really not having anything to do and wondering, how can I do something that is more meaningful than basically just sitting at home doing nothing? So it found that it takes people about 2 to 4 attempts to get this whole retirement thing right and to settle into a lifestyle that they are comfortable with. The second is that people underestimate the lifestyle benefits of working at least part time. And then third, many people experience diminishing returns on leisure. So this is the law of diminishing returns. When all you have to do is play, the play is not as fun as it used to be, right? So Shakespeare supposedly said, leisure is a beautiful garment for a day, but it's an awful choice for permanent attire. And we as humans are just not designed to do all play. So we do really want to try to find that balance. So now that I've probably made you really stressed out and depressed about retirement, the next natural question that you probably have is, okay, so when is the right time to go? And I'm going to turn it over to Atrisa to help us understand this question and how to answer it, as well as what kinds of things we should proactively be doing to prepare for this, what should be very exciting time in our lives. So Atrisa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Anne. So as you can see, the quote on the slide actually I think is really powerful, and it asks, "What is the expiration date on your intellectual, relational, and experiential capital?" So you ask yourself, when is the proper time to go? And I think the first thing to note is you don't go just because others expect you to. You go when you're ready to go. So oftentimes people start to question, when is the right time to retire? And you want to think about time to go is when you're tired, or time to go is when you're bored, or when you're worn out, or even just weary of the working experience. So if you focus on setting your retirement date as when I don't care as much, or I've lost my curiosity, it usually prompts a better experience for your life when you move into a retirement phase. Now, what about the worker bees? And now, of course, we all know the worker bees, those people who say they're going to work until they can't anymore. What's the expression? They're going to die with their boots on. So, an author, Mitch Anthony, he actually defines modern work very differently. And that definition is an engagement that brings value to others and meaning to you. And if you notice, there is nothing in that definition that relates to money or earning money. So even for the worker bees, I think it's important to know that there are ways to redefine your idea of work in retirement. This could be through a volunteer engagement that brings value to others and meaning to you. We know Warren Buffett, and he's well into his 80s, and he's defines himself as a worker bee. And he said that he's going to retire 2 years after he dies. So what we want to express to our clients is that there are ways to reimagine what work means to you that doesn't just mean showing up at the office, until the funeral home. So there are 4 reasons in a recent study that pre-retirees have given for their plans, or why they would want to continue working. And the first one is, of course, to stay healthy, right? A lot of people feel like if they stop moving, if they stop going in every day, stop the engagement, that their health will start to deteriorate. And generally, people just feel better from the experience of engagement through work. Of course, another reason is that a little extra money doesn't hurt. So even for all of those pre-retirees who have sufficiently funded their retirement and know they can retire with enough assets, it's always nice, as Anne mentioned earlier, to see some form of a paycheck still showing up periodically. Another reason why people will continue to work even through retirement age is they just enjoy being in and around people. In our country, so much of our daily engagement is what we do with our colleagues and our team members in our offices. And then, of course, there are the people who just don't want to give up the challenge of getting things done, or of stretching themselves both mentally and physically at work every day. So, in our idea of epic retirement, Anne mentioned that the C in epic stands for, or in this case, represents the vitamin C's of successful aging. And those C's start with connectivity, challenge, staying curious, and fostering creativity. So, when you think about successful aging, connectivity is the idea that you're staying connected to those you love and those who energize you. Doesn't necessarily mean you're just connected to people that you work with. Also, there are other ways to challenge both your mind and body outside of just the work that you do. And then, of course, remaining curious means that you're always challenging and stretching your mental capacity. And considering ways you can do that outside of work is vitally important. A mind that is not learning is deteriorating. And then, of course, fostering creativity or doing those tasks that have been linked to longer life and to living better. I often make a joke here in the office is that my oldest clients who are still so active, they all play tennis. So I told our team here that I've got to incorporate tennis into my physical activity because in my mind, it's that link to living longer and living better. And then, of course, is charity or living charitably. And this is not just financially, but also in ways that helps others. It's its own reward and can increase our sense of purpose as we age successfully. So, what we have started to consider here as a part of our retirement planning at Curo is working with our clients through retirement coaching. So, when you are within 3 to 5 years of living out that epic retirement, you want to start engaging in a process that helps you set yourself up for success through that retirement. And there is a 5 step process that we have discovered that helps to foster the conversations with our clients around what their epic retirement looks like. In that first step, is where we start to reflect on observations. And actually, what we would ask you to do is start to make a list of those attributes of people you have observed who retire well versus people who haven't retired well. If you start to actually reflect on the attributes of those people, it gives insight into your own fears and desires for your own retirement. In the second exercise, we would ask that you focus on vision. And this becomes very literal. And even looking at, for example, this slide of 16 images and selecting up to 6 of those images that best represent your vision of retirement. This helps to trigger some brainstorming about how you see your life in retirement and how you want to spend your time. This can also be very powerful for couples and helping them to find out where their visions of retirement are aligned or misaligned, and then also help to spark some conversations about how much time do we actually want to spend together in our retirement and how much time do we want to spend pursuing our own individual passions. In the third step of the exercise, we start to identify the lifestyle and economic benefits that you receive from work. So now, with me and Ann as advisors, our role traditionally has been to just address the economic benefits of work. But as we have conversations with clients approaching retirement, we understand how important it is to start to address the lifestyle benefits that people get from work. And those things are like social engagement, competition, learning, all of those sort of non financial aspects, our sense of relevance that we get from also going to work every day. So you want to start rating those and considering how much you're scoring each benefit as you start to approach retirement. In the fourth step is where we want to develop a retirementality profile. And this is where you will identify those 4 areas that are most significant in your life. This could be through leisure or pursuit of your hobbies and travel, through renewal, which we think of as wellness, or areas of mental and physical health, even your spiritual health. Connection, deciding who you want to spend your time with and what you will do in that time spent. And then, of course, engagement, which is that sense of being purposeful or living life with meaning. And those things can be accomplished through volunteering or mission work, or even through just continuing work if you choose to. We like to, at Curo, think of retirement as a work optional phase. And I think starting to address some of these aspects helps you determine if work is an option for you in that second phase of your life. And then in the final exercise, and I think this can be really, really important and something that maybe we don't pay enough attention to when we talk about retirement, and that is creating an ideal week for each person. Now, using all of the information that you gathered in the other exercises, it might be helpful to actually even plan out what a week might look like for you. Create a calendar for yourself of things you will do, places you will go, addressing the question of how you will actually spend your time when work is no longer the majority of what you do. And then also, how will you invest in yourself, right? In your own talents, abilities, and skills? Do you want to take up basket weaving or crocheting, or maybe you want to do pottery? But building out an actual ideal week helps you to really come into focus with how you'll spend your time each day throughout your retirement. And then, of course, the goal of any epic retirement is getting the best life possible with the money that you have. Retirement can be and should be one of the best times of your life. And I think with some thoughtful planning, both financially and non financially, you can really set yourself on a path to live out that best time of your life during retirement. So now that brings us to the end of our presentation. We hope that we were able to share some tidbits, and now we can take some questions if we have some. So I am going to stop share, and then we can address any questions that you all may have. All right, so we'll
So if
check
you
out the
have
chat.
any questions, yeah, I was going to say, feel free to drop them in the chat.
And while we wait for any questions to come through, Anne, is there anything else that you'd like to share or that you think is important when retirement planning?
I think it's just a re-emphasis of a lot of the things that we've already talked about. You know, when we reflect on those clients who we've seen through the transition of retirement, I think the happiest ones are the ones who have really figured out how to create a meaningful life and really are clear before they make the decision to retire
Right.
how they're going to spend their time. I'm not sure any of our clients have necessarily done that model week that we showed, which I think is a great idea. You know, you and I have a model week in
Yes.
our work of how we want to spend our time, but I love getting that much more specific. But I just think in observing the clients that are happiest going into retirement, they do still have meaning, whether that is a part-time job where they're consulting and they get to decide what sort of engagements they want to take on because they don't
Right.
need to take them on for the money. So that's really empowering. You know, if you're working part-time, so you've got lots of flexibility to travel and have the time to spend with your family, but you're also bringing in some money and feel like you're giving back and doing some great work. Or if it's volunteer work, but there's still that meaning. I think those are the clients that I at least have observed being the happiest, and we want that for all of our clients.
Absolutely. And I'll just add to that because I thought it was such a great point that you brought up is that diminishing return of leisure in retirement. I think when we see clients first retire, it now frees up the time to do all of the things they wanted to do. So they take the big 2 week long vacation trips. But then after a few years, the pleasure that they derive from all of the travel starts to wane. Right now, it's like, oh, I'm sick of the airport and I'm sick of airplanes and I'm sick of staying in hotels. So I think it's important to think through, right? You could possibly be living in retirement, 25, 30, 35 years. And what does that look like when you no longer are enjoying the things that you enjoyed in that initial phase of retirement? Okay, so it
Right.
looks like we do have one
Exactly.
question.
Yeah. Super.
And it says, how do you evaluate risk tolerance with regards to age or retirement? Okay. And
All
Andy, you
right.
wanna
Great
you
question.
wanna jump in or you want me to take it?
Yeah. Sure, I can jump in, and then, as
Okay.
I always say, I'll forget something, so you can fill fill in the pieces that I miss. So we evaluate risk tolerance actually the same, no matter what age a client is, whether they already are in retirement or they're a young professional. And that is what I would say. It's in two ways. Number one, we start actually with what we call a family rate of return or a family benchmark or index number, which is what kind of rate of return do we need to achieve for you to reach your goals. So instead of benchmarking to something like the S&P 500 index, which lots of people like to benchmark to because that seems like the most obvious one to benchmark, we actually benchmark what kind of rates of return do we need to get when we compare it to your goals, and how do we help you achieve your goals. So that's number one. Number two, we use a pretty innovative technology that does a great job of assessing your comfort level with volatility, which no one's really ever fully comfortable with volatility. But what we're trying to stress test there is we want to make sure we have you in a portfolio whereby when the markets go down and there is craziness in the markets, which there inevitably will be, you don't decide to do something rash like going to cash, when we know as long-term investors that's the absolute worst thing we can do. So what we do is we marry those two things together, where we look at what is the rate of return that we need to achieve to help you get to your goals. And number two, what is that comfort level that you have with volatility, where we feel confident that you will continue to stick with the plan even when things are going on around you. And then the last thing that I would just add is, when we're dealing with the same client, but let's say we're working on different goals that have different time horizons, we also incorporate the time horizon question. So if we're working on a goal that's 20 years in the future, we can afford to be more growth oriented, to experience more volatility than if we're investing for something that's, say, 5 years down the road. So we're also going to incorporate the time horizon to whatever goal we're working on. So
Yeah.
Teresa, would you add anything
I
to
think
that?
that was super complete. The only note I would add is that risk tolerance is not directly correlated to age. And it's something that we talk to clients a lot about. I think clients will say, oh, well, I'm older now, so maybe I should be dialing back my risk. And the answer is maybe you should. But I think that idea is absolutely subjective. I have clients who are in their 80s or 90s who, if I would let them be 100% S&P 500, they absolutely would be. And then I have 40-year-old clients who could keep everything in a mattress, they would. So risk is not directly correlated to how old you are. And like Ann mentioned, it's important to determine based on your own family situation what that personal level of risk should be, and that benchmark that we set for judging your investment performance over time. Okay. So we have another
Yes, great
question, and
question.
this is just in general about our process at Curo Private Wealth, and what we do in the planning process. And I will just start by saying that we are comprehensive financial planners. So our process is thorough and fully complete, and it typically starts with a discovery session. And in that discovery session, we like to address a lot of the things that we've talked about today. So, not just what your financial goals are, but what your lifestyle goals look like. Any client that has worked with us has probably seen our goals and vision planner, because we want to understand, as your advisor, what things in your life are important to you. What things do you want to accomplish? Are there charitable or philanthropic aspirations? Or are you one of those people who say, no, I want to spend every dime before I leave? It's important that we understand what is important just to you as a person when we start the process of financial engagement. And of course, once we have that discovery session and determine that we are a good fit for one another, then is when we really dive in through strategy and wanting to engage you from a financial aspect. This is when we'll ask for all of the statements and the documents and the expense worksheet. We'll want you to create a budget. We really get into the nuts and bolts of building a financial plan. And then our next step in the process is usually creating ways to implement that plan. That could be through the investment management. We will consult with you on what to do in 401ks that we manage. And then, of course, one of the most important parts to financial planning in general is just that monitoring the plan and periodic check-ins. So we will always remain engaged with our planning clients. We want to act as their consultants. So as things come up, we want them to feel comfortable engaging us just in the same way they would with a doctor or an attorney or any other professional in their lives. But I'm sure I've missed something in that process as well, Anne.
No, that was great and thorough. The one thing I would just kind of double click on is we believe very strongly in the proactive and regular touch points and check-ins. To Teresa's point, we'll come up with a plan, we'll help you implement it, but then guess what? Life is going to happen. Things are going to happen in our lives that are unexpected, because That's one of the rules of the universe, that the unexpected always will happen. But also things will happen in the financial markets, or from a regulatory perspective. Congress will pass a tax law that we need to understand and potentially make changes in your situation. Those regular checkpoints are really important to make sure that we're keeping up with any changes in your lives. We are communicating changes in the financial markets, so you don't have to Google those things. We want to be that resource for you to really explain what happened and what does this mean. And then we're making sure that we're continuing to work that plan for you, because that's one of our beliefs, is having and working a plan is one of the most important things that any of us can do to increase the likelihood that we achieve our financial goals. And we take the onus on scheduling those meetings on ourselves. So we reach out to you instead of you needing to remember, oh, I'm due for a meeting with Teresa or Anne. Caroline, who I'm sure you all have heard from, is amazing at reaching out and making sure we get those meetings scheduled. But then we have a complete open door policy. So if something happens in the meantime, something that impacts your financial position or your goals, we want to hear from you. We want to be a resource for you, and we want to help you through those life decisions. So we always say you don't have to call us if you're about to buy a new big screen TV, but any other big financial decisions, we would love to be a part of.
Yeah. And
so thank you for that question.
Yeah. While we are regionally in the DC metro area, we serve and work with clients all over the country. And of course, technology makes that possible, where we can engage in these ways. So we can do those meetings virtually for our clients, as well as in person if they would prefer to come in and, see us and have a cup of coffee as well.
Yes, exactly. And we have 2 conveniently located offices in the DC metro, one in Virginia and one in Maryland. So hopefully we cover our bases there.
Yeah. Okay, one more question here. Should you get rid of all debt before going into retirement? And I think this is an absolutely timely question, because shameless plug, I believe it's episode 4 of the new Living Richly with Curo podcast. Anne and I have this exact conversation about debt in retirement.
Yes. I think it's episode 3, the mortgage.
Okay.
I think it's episode 3. Yeah. But it regardless, it drops this Friday. So whatever episode number it is, we've done so many podcasts, we can't even keep track.
I know, we can't keep track of them.
Yeah, exactly. So this is such a great question. And please do check out our podcast on Friday, where we really go in depth about how to analyze. But we'll bottom line it for you here, which is we don't have a hard and fast rule that says everyone should go into retirement with 0 debt. And you'll notice that in every conversation we have with clients, instead of saying always you should do this or you should never do that, we really do take a very personalized and very customized approach to giving you advice based on what we know is important to you and what we know about your financial position. So what we talk about in that podcast episode is approaching the should I pay off debt conversation. We specify that this is about a mortgage, but it's really about any debt that you have. There are 2 ways to analyze if you should pay off debt. Number 1 is a financial, where you look at what is the cost of carrying that debt versus what is the potential rate of return you could get on that same money if you invested it, whether it's in a money market now earning over 5%, or you invest it in, say, the stock and or bond market. And then the second way to approach that decision is really the emotional, psychological. So our point is, even if financially maybe it makes sense to keep some sort of debt because the cost of keeping that debt is very low and you're getting a higher rate of return on your investments, if it is keeping you up at night to have that debt, we would say pay it off. And if that is a psychological factor that you know about yourself that will stress you out and bring more negativity to your life in retirement. We've already talked about the natural things you're going to have to deal with going into retirement. Let's not add something else to the pile if we can prevent it. So if that is you and you know that about yourself, then we would encourage you to pay off that debt before going into retirement. So it's one less thing to worry about. But we have clients that don't have that sort of psychological approach to having debt, and they want to make the best financial decision. And so if the numbers work out, then we'll encourage them to keep the debt and pay it off and invest the money outside of that. So anything you would add to that, Teresa?
Yeah, I would just add, I think sometimes the answer is also a blend of the things where you're maybe paying down debt aggressively as you approach retirement as opposed to getting rid of all of it. And I think, and we explore this deeper in the podcast, but there are ideas of good debt and bad debt. And it stuck with me. I recently read a study that was done where they asked Americans if they could cover a $1,000 emergency from savings, and only 44 respondents said that they could. So I do also think that there is an imbalance of making sure that emergency cash reserves are sufficient before pulling out money to pay down debt, because then if it's not, what ends up happening is you get hit with an emergency and then you start to accumulate bad debt by putting those charges on your credit card. So oftentimes there's a balance of the two things. But as Anne has shared, if it's a mental block that you have where you're just completely debt averse, then obviously we want to promote you being able to relieve yourself of that mental anxiety as you go into what should be one of the best times of your life.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question.
Okay, well,
All right. I
have a
don't
few
see
more
any other
minutes. Yeah, I don't see anything
questions.
else, but we'll do a last call if there's anything else you wanted to ask.
In the
Okay, well,
meantime, while we're waiting for any last minute, just a reminder to, if you are not a client of Curo's and you want to learn more, we have a lot of information on our website at curoprivatewealth.com. For our existing clients, you will have seen in our newsletter recently, we have been making an effort to put out a lot of interesting and informative content, whether that's on YouTube through videos or on our recently launched podcast. So please check those things out, subscribe to your favorite platform, follow us on all the social channels, because we are putting that content out as a way to educate and entertain. And also, please give us your feedback on any topics or things that you would like for us to dig deeper in or to talk about, because that is all for you. It's for you. So we want to make sure that we're giving you valuable content.
Yep. And then again, just one more plug for our newly launched podcast, Living Richly with Curo. We are on the major podcasting sites, so Apple Podcasts, I believe also Spotify. So also subscribe and follow, and feel free to share the podcast with anyone who may be interested in some of the topics Anne and I discuss each week.
Yes, exactly. All right. So I see a thank you. So I think that's probably our key to wrap. So thank you again for spending some time with us here today. We hope it was interesting, informative. We want all of you to have an epic retirement. So if you are interested in chatting more about any, especially about the coaching process that Atrisa mentioned, please let us know, and we'll make sure to incorporate that conversation in our next review meeting with you. We definitely want to be supportive in any way we possibly can. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Until next time, we hope you have a great rest of the week and a great summer. Can't believe it's already summer.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great weekend.